Hello there, good to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Platform on the network service of the NTA, and our focus today has everything to do with you and me. Of course, we know security challenges remain a major threat to most nations, Nigeria inclusive, with the country daily grappling to tackle its own share of the challenges. Now, one major aspect of it is jailbreak, which poses a major threat in the country. Now, jailbreaks are pervasive issues that kept on happening in the country, and according to records, thousands of prisoners we hear have escaped from the various correctional centers in Nigeria over the years. Now, some states across the country have witnessed these acts, notably Bauchi, Ogun, Edo, Ondo, Lagos, Kogi, Ekiti, Mina, and the latest, Owerri, in Imo State on the 5th of April, where some gunmen attacked and destroyed the Owerri Custodial Center and freed about 1,844 inmates, a scenario many have described as unfortunate. Now, with such happenings, what implications does this have on our national security? How can these jailbreaks be averted? What measures should be put in place to improve security around custodial centers across the country? Now, the questions continue. And on Platform today, our focus is on security challenges and prison breaks in Nigeria. Our guest is a security risk expert. He is Kabiru Adamu, the managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited, a renowned firm providing enterprise risk and security management solutions in Nigeria and the Sahel region. Kabir is a dynamic and professional security and intelligence executive with a sound track record in the public and private sectors, including humanitarian and development. He is experienced in security consultancy and project management at a multinational level and has supported clients with operations in hostile, challenging and complex environments. He has an extensive capacity in successfully interfacing at strategic, regional and local levels, utilizing experience gained in the security environment combined with academic skills developed during professional studies. It goes on and on. He's just an expert when you're talking security business. And Kabiru Adamu is, of course, one of our regular guests on NTA, and we're always pleased to have you join us. Thank you very much for coming on Platform.
Thank you, Ruth. The pleasure is mine.
All right, so I won't be the only one on Platform. As usual, we have a panelist, and our panelist today is Femi Okewo. He's a judiciary correspondent with NTA. Thank you very much.
Always nice to be on the platform.
Okay, so Mr. Kabiru, of course, you know the nation woke up on 5th to hear the sad news of the jailbreak. How did you take it? We're talking about the Imo State jailbreak.
I was very worried, mainly because I was looking at it from the lens of an expert who would not only see the visible signs, but would also look at perhaps the reasons and the circumstances that led to the development. One of the things that occurred to me immediately is that is a hard target. In security balance, we have soft targets and then hard targets. Now, soft targets are more or less civilian places that don't have a very robust security posture. And then hard targets are usually public institutions or private individuals that have the resources and are able to deploy security arrangement in a very robust manner. Now, in all ramifications, the correctional service is a hard target or should be a hard target. And for such a hard target to be attacked, and then for inmates numbering up to 1,800 to be successfully freed, as it were, made me very, very worried. Some of the reasons why I was worried is the capacity of the attackers. Apparently, it was planned. They had time to study the security arrangement at the correctional service. They had time to do like a rehearsal and consider if the posture in the correctional service with attempts to withstand the firepower with which they attempt to enter the place, how long will they withstand that firepower? What kind of weaponry would they need to circumvent the security posture in the correctional service? And then more importantly, what strategy will they implement to allow these 1,800 persons to escape? Perhaps, and this is very likely, they were interested in one or two or three or a couple of those inmates. Where were those inmates particularly housed within the correctional service? How easy would it be for them to get to those inmates? What insider support do they have inside the correctional services? So those were the kind of things that came to my head when the news came. Of course, over time, more information emerged, and we found out the proximity of that correctional service to the government house, the proximity of the correctional service to the divisional police headquarters.
Which I was going to ask. You know, there's a police station strategic to the custodial center. So how did they get away with 1,800 or more, inmates going away freely?
From all indications, the police command was more interested in protecting itself than offering support to the correctional service. Because clearly they also attacked the divisional headquarters.
Yes,
in fact, they burnt down some parts of that divisional headquarters.
But did they protect themselves eventually?
Eventually they did, and I think very significant, thank you for bringing that out. The armory of that divisional headquarters was actually protected, because in previous attacks, one of the things that has happened is that the armory would be circumvented, and then weapons from that armory would be stolen, which unfortunately would also add to the arsenal of the attackers. But in this instance, the police in particular were successful. We are not aware of whether the armory within the correctional service was circumvented. The information is not out, and I don't know if any of you is aware of that. I am not aware yet, but I know the police has come out to say they protected the armory within the divisional headquarters. So those were the kind of things going through my head at that point in time. Another aspect is the likely perpetrators. Before the police came out with a statement that it was the indigenous people of Biafra, I was also looking at that angle, for the simple reason that there had been a previous intelligence that was released by the public security departments saying that there were active cells of the indigenous people of Biafra in Imo State. The government of Imo State has also released such a statement, and they've also warned either their supporters or actors or whatever you want to call them to not use Imo State as a launch ground for whatever activities they want. So clearly the first suspect would be that indigenous people of Biafra, and perhaps the wing that they established, the Instant Security Network. And so I wasn't very surprised when the immediate past Inspector General of Police pointed a finger to IPOP as being the likely suspect. Now, also imagine, interestingly, today, and this makes the controversy a bit thicker, the DSS is alleging, at least through online reports, that it has released report to the police indicating the likelihood of such an attack. So which takes me back to my sort of initial assessment. Usually in security, we deploy security in concentric cycles, even in industrial security. And in public security, it's even more important. So concentric cycle, number one, it's wider. And then
before we go into this detailed analysis, when I heard your first response to Roots popping for this program, I used it as a template for similar events that had taken place. I take myself back to the jailbreak in Kotonkavri by Boko Haram. Those, some of the worries you expressed now on this program can be placed exactly with that jailbreak. Why is it becoming a pattern? Is it part of our deficiency in our securing of correctional centers that is playing out all through all the jailbreaks?
A couple of things, and I like calling a spade a spade. So I hope I'm not going to, gauze anybody's axe by some of the statements I'm going to make. The integrity of our correctional services is in question, and this is a direct statement to the Minister of Interior and the person in charge of the correctional services. They need to conduct an audit and speedily on the integrity of our correctional services.
What do you mean by integrity?
I'll explain that. Yes. In security, when you speak of integrity, you're speaking about the access to it. You want to make sure you have quote and unquote, only authorized access, especially in this instance where it's a security zone. You are keeping sometimes hardened criminals, that there are people out there that will be interested in either freeing them or getting to them to kill them. So you want to make sure, in fact, correctional services should have almost the kind of security at par with the security in the villa. Or sometimes even more because of the nature of the inmates. Now that means, for instance, a good example, how come today you have inmates that have telephones and are able to make calls with people outside? How come you have inmates that are able to organize for food, from what I'm hearing, cows to be slaughtered, and then they are feeding other inmates? How come you have inmates that are able to organize events within the correctional services? How come you have inmates that are able to dictate activities outside the correctional services? So clearly the integrity of correctional services is not sacrosanct. That's number one. Number two, the physical security within the correctional services. In Cotton Garfi, it was the walls that were broken into. A hole was bored into the wall, just through which they were able to escape. When it happened in Edo, almost the same thing.
Yes.
In some instances, all they do is put a ladder, and then they now cross over the wall through the ladder. So clearly, there is an issue with the physical security in our correctional services.
So let's begin to draw the line, because if we're looking at the walls, we have seen instances where it's low height, we have seen instances where it's tall walls, but that's not enough. It's just building walls. With what has happened and what keeps happening, and we don't pray for this to happen again, because you're letting loose hardened criminals, which poses major threats, to the security of the country. How would we begin to address the incomplexities of, our custodial centers? Where should we start from?
That's why I advise the Minister of Interior to authorize an audit. The audit would determine the deficiencies within the correctional services.
But there are some glaring deficiencies.
So yes, we can use that from a layman's perspective.
Okay.
But from a professional perspective, you need to determine it absolutely, to not only to understand the physical deficiencies, but operational deficiencies. I've mentioned some of them. If an inmate is able to make a call to the outside world, then there's an operational deficiency in terms of this kind of supervisory presence within the authority. It may be corruption, I don't want to use that word. It may be that what is allowing that to happen. So only an audit, both an operational audit, a physical audit, that would determine what these lapses are. From a cursory look, I can tell you what some of these deficiencies are. I mentioned earlier on that security is deployed in concentric cycles. Now, in correctional service, this is even more important. There is no way that the external wall that you and I see should be the wall for the correctional service.
Yes.
Usually you have at least 3 walls.
Yes.
Which is the practice outside the country.
Even here, in some instances, in the standard correctional services, you have that. So that even if that outside wall is penetrated, then you still have to cross through what is probably, for lack of a better word, a buffer zone to the next layer. And then even when you are able to penetrate that next layer,
by the time you're doing all that,
exactly, reinforcement.
Yes.
So those are the kind of things that an audit would reveal. And then, the audit will be able to specify in clear terms the requirements. Okay, we went to Cotton Garfi, this is what we saw, this is what is required. We went to Kaduna, this is what we saw, this is what is required. And that is why that audit is absolutely important. If we don't do that, then we run the risk of continuously being encountered with this type of situation. NSAS happened. And for some of us, it was a wake-up call. In fact, I was in this studio, probably in this particular studio, when I mentioned that what we witnessed was 2.0 revolution, 2.0 revolution. Some smart young persons understood the complexities of the cyberspace and saw that there was a vulnerability within the Nigerian cyberspace, exploited it to mobilize, both for funding as well as physical mobilization, and achieved their objectives. Now that should have been a wake-up call for us, where we're able to understand the cyberspace and monitor it in such a manner that we can anticipate these types of risks, and not only anticipate them, put in place mitigation measures. So back to the correctional service, exactly the same discussion. I'll bet you that if we had ears and eyes in the cyberspace, we would have picked up some form of planning for what happened in Owerri.
One new correctional center is being built in Owerri. We visited it. The Presidential Committee on Correctional Services Reform visited it. It has seemingly not taken place. That's why we still have the old one. Some of the newest correctional centers now in Nigeria are about, the newest would be about 30, 40 years old. There are correctional centers that are 100 years old in Nigeria, which talks about some of the deficiencies being part of the history of correctional centers, and there's little that can be done about that except to build new ones. But the location of correctional centers is a major deficiency, do you think?
I agree totally, and these are the things that the audit would reveal. Where you have a situation where, and I've been challenged about this, whether there are ungoverned spaces. There are ungoverned spaces in Nigeria. It doesn't mean, for instance, that the space is not within a territory belonging to Nigeria. It is within a territory belonging to Nigeria, but what is the presence of the Nigerian state within that territory? I'm talking of those forested areas, I'm talking of those mountainous areas. Now, it would be suicidal to have a correctional service close to any of those locations, for the simple reason that even where you have correctional services far away from those locations, if a determined bandit group or criminal group is bent on attacking that correctional service, and they come hundreds of them on a motorbike with each of them holding an AK-47 with 60 rounds of ammunition on it, 2 magazines tied together. Think about it, and professionals would understand what I'm saying. What is the size of the armory within that correctional service? In fact, not just the size of the armory, the deployment that is within that correctional center. What kind of weapons do they have? How many ammunitions do they have that they can withstand that number of force that is coming to attack them?
Which brings us to this question that will readily come to mind. If you're imagining such scenario in your head, what about collaboration between security agencies? Now, you clearly stated that from what you perceived with what happened with Owerri, it's like the police was trying to protect its own self. Where does cooperation comes in? If we have to protect some of these custodial centers or all of it, is it just prisons officers that will be there, or what kind of cooperation should we begin to see?
As far as I know, the mandate for the protection of correctional services is within the prisons service. You can correct me on that.
That's true.
As far as I know.
Yes.
However,
but she's talking about collaboration.
Exactly, and I'm going to go to that. Yes. There are 27 ministries, departments, and agencies in Nigeria that are involved in security. 27. And so, where these 27 are coordinated and are working to serve a single purpose, then I can bet you the results of their functions, their activities will be more effective. You and I as Nigerians will feel the effect of that collaboration more than what we are feeling at the moment. So
what is stalling that?
For the purposes of the discussion we are having, I'll keep it as a failure of coordination. And there are 4 units within the government apparatus that are responsible for coordination within the security architecture. The number one that is visible to everybody is the Office of the National Security Advisor. But that office has its own impediments. Like the name suggests, it's an advisory office. Under President Goodluck Jonathan, the occupier of that office was elevated to a senior cabinet member. However, his functions are not commensurate with that elevation. And I'll explain what I mean. The other coordinating elements within the security infrastructure, the Ministry of Interior, you have the Minister of Defense, and then you have the Minister of Police Affairs, newly introduced. And then lastly, a bit controversial, you have the Chief of Staff to Mr. President, as well as the Secretary to the Government of the Federation. Now, this more or less 5, 6 different units have coordination elements. And so that for me is the lacuna. Where you have 5 or 6 units coordinating a single thing, then the likelihood of function efficiency is not likely to...
Would you rather you have only one unit doing that?
Not necessarily, but as an example, so internal security. I think it would have been absolutely better if we have one coordinating unit for internal security, then maybe another coordinating unit for the military function, as an example. And then, of course, for the intelligence body, you have one coordinating unit. But where, and this becomes a bit convoluted, road safety, civil defense, to an extent, immigration, and name them, they are all policing functions.
Yes.
In most countries of the world, all of them come under the police. But in our own peculiar situation, some of them are under the Ministry of Police Affairs, like the police itself, while the others are the Ministry of Interior. So you have the Minister of Interior coordinating those policing units, while the police is coordinating the police itself. So synergy is almost impossible at that policy and strategic level. And the good thing, and a bit surprising to me, the previous government realized this. I think it was under the Obasanjo administration, and they set up the Orosonyo committee to delineate these functions and to ensure that these types of lack of synergy
and consolidate in some cases.
Exactly. So it recommended the consolidation of, if I remember very well, the road safety was one of the agencies that was mentioned. But unfortunately, implementation has become difficult. So what I'm saying is it's not new. It's been some previous policy, administrators, makers have realized it, and they've attempted to correct it. Now, to answer your question, for protection of correctional services to be done effectively, that coordination needs to be absolute. In other words, the mandate for the protection of strategic institutions need to be put in the right place. Currently, that mandate is with the civil defense. But you and I know the challenges within the civil defense.
Yes.
Even its disposition is not good enough to withstand even the most common threats.
It's still questionable.
Exactly. Yeah. So it cannot carry out that responsibility. And that is why I am of the opinion that, like a lot of other experts have recommended, we need a special unit, a tactical unit, perhaps from the police or the military or any of the existing security agencies that is specially trained for responding to such critical incidences like the type we saw in Owerri. They must be deployed across the 36 states. They must have rapid deployment capabilities, including airplanes or helicopters, just like you see in movies as SWAT as an example. Those type of capabilities, so that we set a response time of between, let's say, 2 to maximum 15 minutes. Any time there is a major incident, that tactical unit specially trained for deployment.
Are we going to get there?
No, we have to. We have no choice, because we're in 2021.
Because this is not new. I'm not even talking about jailbreaks.
Yes.
Other security issues, we've been seeing. Sorry, Mr. Femi.
Okay.
We've been seeing other security. We've seen kidnappings. We've seen communal clashes.
That last 4 hours.
Do you understand? Are we going to get there?
So this is the solution. It's either we have that tactical unit, well-trained and well-armed with all the equipment that it needs. I mentioned even helicopters to deploy. And we must set a target for between 2 to 15 minutes. Because frankly, anything outside of that, it's gone. If it's kidnapped, they've already carried their victims and they've gone away with them.
Because they're organized.
Exactly. They would have planned their routes, escape routes, everything. So we need that type of special force. Some have recommended the National Guard. You remember when former President Babangida attempted to do that? Yes. Some have recommended that perhaps a National Guard with that type of responsibility, where they are deployed, especially in extreme cases like that. But I am of the opinion that we don't need a new sort of setup. From the existing ones, we can create tactical units. And the interesting thing is this: almost all the let's say 18, because the armed forces within I mentioned 27. Out of that 27, I think 18 of them have the mandate to carry arms. Almost all of them have tactical units. So we just need to consolidate those tactical units and then prepare them for this type of special assignments, so that we can deploy them in instances like this.
Who triggers a response to instances like this? Who, like she said, this is not the first time. We had the Chibok raid, which lasted 4 to 5 hours.
Kafanchan in Kaduna.
Okay.
Sorry, not Kafanchan, College of Forestry.
Afaka. No, it lasted 3 to 4 hours. No. So now we have the Owerri, and the people say it's lasted up to 2 hours. In the absence of a call from the people, the victims, the prison officials and warders and all that, How else can a response be triggered in this kind of situation?
Well, you've mentioned the number one way, which is for those that are directly affected to either place a call or press the panic button. If that is not possible, and it could be for a lot of reasons why it's not possible, then
why would it not be possible? Everybody has a GSM phone.
I'm not comfortable, and this is another.
Everybody that means this time now, the warders, the prison officials, the security people, all of them have GSM.
So I was going to say that I'm not comfortable with us relying on GSM for official, confidential information. Anyone who knows...
It's been monitored.
Anyway, exactly.
It's been monitored.
So I agree with you that it's the common practice, but it's not the best. So we should correct that.
Okay.
All our security agencies should have means of communication that are encrypted and that are confidential. Currently, they don't have. And that in itself is a challenge. Okay. So aside, well...
WhatsApp is encrypted.
But even at that, it's not an official means of communication. Encrypted from who?
Okay.
That's the question.
Yes.
Even if it's encrypted from you and I, not from the people who perhaps made it. And are they serving our interest? No. So we need to remember that. We need to have a means of communication between our security agencies that are confidential. Even the military, unfortunately, doesn't seem to have enough of that. I've seen instances where top-level generals communicate on GSM. That's unfortunate. So, but to answer your question, if the target itself is not able to communicate, then onlookers, and that is where citizen responsibility comes in. If you see that type of activity, you place a call. But where our challenge is most times there are no protocols for this things. I am into a business. I run a consultancy. What I do is I look at an environment, a corporate environment, and I come up with protocols. First off, I do a plan, a security plan, and then under that security plan, I have standard operating procedures. So as an example, if your premises is under attack, I don't want to put you guys on the spot in NTA, but I can ask that question.
Yes.
If your premises is under attack, what have you been taught to do? Every corporate environment should have that process in its head. Have you taught your staff that you are responsible for what to do if they are under distress? Included in that, what to do should have an advisory for who to call, and how to place that call. Then you should also do drills that would help staff, because if you don't do drills, they will panic. And once they panic, they put themselves in danger. But once you do drills, they already know what to do, if God forbid. And the likelihood in Nigeria of something like that happening is extremely high. So that means you should not rely, as we all do, on faith, or in most corporate organizations, if you go to them, they will tell you that the DSS or the police is already taking care of us. But the reality is this. I agree they're taking care of you. They've got big guns that I don't have. But what you need at that point is not brawn. You need brains. All of these protocols that I mentioned, they would prevent the incident from happening. The gun would only help you when the incident is about to happen. It is those steps that you take before they happen. So, to your question, those protocols, those procedures, they are very important. They would specify who makes the calls, to who does the person make the calls, and that brings me to the next point. You must have some relationship with the security departments in your area. NTA, as an example, I'm sure you have somebody in charge of responsibility. That person should have excellent relationship with all the security formations within your neighborhood. And by excellent relationship, I mean to the extent that they call themselves on first-name basis.
Things like this have been outsourced in most corporate organizations.
Unfortunately, outsourced, yes, but not outsourced privately, outsourced to most times the DSS.
Okay.
And I'm not, what's the word? I'm not, I don't mean to belittle the work of the DSS. They're doing a fantastic job. But these things have procedures. If you don't do those procedures, then when it matters, it will show. So you need to have a clear, step-by-step recommendation of actions to take. And that's where what we call the standard operating procedures that would delineate in clear terms your A, B, C. If you're under distress.
Okay, and you know, a lot of security experts have called for critical thinking education, the promotion of it, which is one major tool if we want to tackle security challenge. And from that aspect, this is where intelligence gathering comes in place. Oftentimes, that is what most security operatives hinge on, intelligence gathering. But one other aspect that has not been paid due attention to is proper surveillance system. It's very key. What's your take on that?
So the truth of it is surveillance is actually fits into intelligence. The information that raw information and the processing of that raw information is what makes intelligence. So when you are doing surveillance, what you are gathering is actually information. So what it means is that the effectiveness of your intelligence is dependent on your gathering sources. Now, if you have good surveillance capabilities, then the likelihood is you have a very good collection capability. And once you have a collection capability and you're able to process that information very well, then you will have intelligence. So to answer your question directly, the entire intelligence process from collection, dissemination are very important. We cannot downplay one over the other. If you collect very good intelligence but you don't disseminate it, then it's useless.
Yes.
If you collect very good intelligence and you disseminate it and the user does not use it, then it's not serving you any purpose. So there are so many aspects of the intelligence cycle that I can pick on, and I can tell you, unfortunately, it's faulty in Nigeria. Not too long ago, we had a former DSS, I'm sorry, I'm not going to mention names, who released a report in a national daily where he claimed that some recipients of intelligence prefer to rely on clerics than the intelligence organizations in Nigeria. That's dangerous for a country. And you and I are living witnesses that somebody was paid 4 billion naira under the former administration to organize clerics to, quote and unquote, provide intelligence for a government. So very worrisome situation in the country. Now, if that is the situation that still sustains, then that needs to be corrected. I can also go ahead and tell you, if we're looking at intelligence at the national level, that there are platforms for intelligence collection that are not being funded the way they should be funded, unfortunately.
Which is one of our major lapses if we want to look at capacity. Because most of these investigations, we want to look at forensic approach, but we don't have the capacity.
I think we've come better than where we were. Some investments have been made. I was a bit shocked the other time. I had reasons to visit one of the labs in the FCT Police Command, and I was quite impressed. Now, whether that is being deployed for you and I is another area to consider. Whether we just have the lab and it's not being used the way it should be used, that's another reason. Not too long ago, after the bombing in Nyanya, I had cause to visit one of the investigators, and I found out he had placed the steering wheel of the vehicle that was used to deliver the bomb. And virtually everybody that came into the office while I was there touched that steering wheel. And in my mind, I said evidence has been destroyed.
Yes.
So very critical to intelligence and the forensic investigation you're talking about, the infrastructure to store evidences. Because all of these things, they work hand in hand. If you are effective in gathering the evidences, but you don't have an evidence lab where you can store the evidence, then
it's useless.
Frankly, it is useless. Even the gloves. How many times have you seen you call for a police deployment?
At crime scenes.
Exactly. That they come with gloves. How many times have you seen that? I've only seen it once in my life in Nigeria, frankly. So there are a multitude of issues within the intelligence collection cycle that if we pick, there are issues. But what I think is absolutely necessary, we need a leadership that calls a spade, and that is ready to be accountable for its action. So by this, I mean in the 27 ministries and departments and agencies that are in security, each and every one of them should be accountable for the mandate that it's been given. In the case of the correctional services, the attack in Owerri, they came with military-grade weapons that should not be in the hands of any civilian or non-state actor. In Nigeria, we have a situation where these weapons are in the hands of non-state actors. Now, who is responsible for our border protection? Customs and Immigration. we need to call these two organizations up, call them up and ask them, what's happening to our borders? Why are these weapons being able, we're not manufacturing these weapons? I know recently I discovered that we have the capacity to produce what I would call fabricated AK-47s. I was shocked. We've got local factories that are producing fabricated AK-47s. I don't want to shock you with the revelations. Like I concluded an investigation recently on small arms and light weapons in the sub-region and in Nigeria in particular, and I was shocked at my findings. So that's an area that we need to address like speedily. It ties into the discussions we're having about correctional services. That attack was only possible because of the weapons at their disposal. If we address this proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and even these military-grade weapons, then we would reduce some of the threat factors.
Let me take you back a little bit to just the point you made now about a government paying clerics an amount. At what point would a government, this or anyone, decide to say, I need the buy-in of the citizenry? And how does that government divide the line between the intelligence it gets from citizenry, clerics and all that, and the official intelligence?
So most of the agencies within the intelligence community should be conduits for facilitating these types of processes. I mentioned earlier on that the value of the information you collect during the collection cycle in the intelligence, the process rather in the intelligence cycle, yes, will determines the product of your intelligence. So if you realize that clerics have that kind of information, it's the responsibility of those agencies within the intelligence community to interact with those clerics. In fact, I will be shocked, and it will be a misnomer if those agencies don't already have clerics that they are working together with, okay, that are able to call them up and say, look, based on my interaction with this particular individual or group, they are planning XYZ. You need to do XYZ. So that's the way to go. Mm-hmm. However, if it's politicized, mm-hmm, that is where the danger comes in, where the agencies within the intelligence community become conduits for political actualization of certain ideals, and then they become funnels for which funding is being pushed through to certain aspects of governance. Okay. And that is the danger, because that line now between intelligence and political actualization has been breached. You should never expose any intelligence community to that. They can be used, as it were, to achieve certain objectives of government, but not in a manner where the integrity of that organization is being brought to disrepute, as happened in the past.
You know, the sad thing is that most rural communities mostly suffer these security threats because they are, let me use your security term, soft spots, so to say. Every nation has its own challenge. One way or the other, they're dealing constantly with their domestic or international security status. And if we want to just call it a complex, scenario whereby you just need just a countermeasure to deal with it. But what about a concrete preventive and resilient decisions, especially in those rural communities where we see majority of the security threats happen? We shouldn't just focus on the urban centers.
I agree with you totally. And I think even the Buhari administration realized this when it launched the revised National Security Strategy 2019. That document in its entirety indicated to us that there was going to be a paradigm shift from a state-centered security approach to a citizen-centered security approach, basically saying that this idea where state officials get deployments of security personnel to protect them is not the way to go. The security is going to be democratized so that the average person in the village would also feel the effect of the security function in the state. Now, unfortunately, it stopped at that promise. The implementation of that document has been halted, and I honestly don't know why. It was well received. A lot of us commended that promise, and we've asked severally for the custodian of that document to begin the process of the implementation of that document. And I'm speaking specifically to the Office of the National Security Advisor. He is the custodian of that document. Now, why is this important? Every citizen, there's a social contract. I relinquish some level of my freedom to you in government because you promised to protect me. Where I wake up and you're unable to protect me, then I start questioning that social contract. And unfortunately, what you are seeing in Nigeria is exactly that. A lot of people are beginning to question the reason why they are relinquishing that authority, as it were, to government when government is not able to protect them. And I want to be clear here. I'm not just speaking about the federal government. When I say government, I'm speaking about the state government and the local government. Each tier of government has a level of responsibility in security, despite the fact that security remains in the exclusive list. I'm hoping that as part of the constitutional changes, we would see a change in that, where governance at the state level and the community level would be constitutionally allowed to play a role.
Give us a picture of the responsibility a local government has for security. Because easily on TV or radio, what you hear is that the governor is the chief security officer, and then the governor too complains that he doesn't have control over the military. So where, give us a picture of the kind of...
Mr. Femi, let me put it lightly here. I want those governors who are saying that every time the security vote is brought to them, let them reject it. Then we'll know they're serious. Honestly, I have not had one of them rejecting the security vote. Okay. And I'm aware also that every week, for the serious governors, they do hold security council meetings. Yes. And I doubt if there is any leader of any security agency at the state level that the governor will be hosting a state security council meeting and that governor will not come to, that appointee. Yes. Of any of the agencies, the 27 I've mentioned, at state level, that will not come to that meeting. He will probably be fired by the next week.
You know, Mr. Kabiru, earlier you mentioned special squad, which is one way out. One of the ways out, tactical squad, which is one of the ways out. And I know the issue of community policing has been lingering for a very long time. But let's focus on the ones that are already existing, talking about our vigilantes. We see their efforts. Let's not ignore that. They make constant efforts to just protect their communities. What kind of support would you recommend? If they are the first hand, more like a first aid in health, to reach out, to offer help at that time, what kind of support should they be given?
Ruth, this is a beautiful question, and it touches at the core of the challenges within the national security architecture. There are several layers of that national security architecture that have been neglected. This is one of them. Yes, security remains within the exclusive list, but necessity has led to the emergence of several supporting structures. I'll use that loose word for this public security arrangement that we have. And the agency that should have responsibility for harnessing the value of this disparate arrangements that are in existence, which is the police. And to an extent, the civil defense have not clearly done that, harnessed the value in them. So when you talk of vigilante, the arrangement is that all of these vigilantes are subsumed under the policing arrangement. Yeah. So if what the ideal thing is for the police to engage them, train them, and in doing that, make them understand where their powers, authority starts and where it ends. So a good example is this. They have the powers of arrest, just like you and I have. If we see something wrong, we can arrest the person and then present the person to the law enforcement agencies, in particular the police. But the challenge we've had in Nigeria is that because the police have not stepped in to do that training, and not only do that training, ensure that at the constitutional level, at the state, especially at the state where the legislatures, where they are coming up with the acts or the laws for bringing these arrangements into place, sometimes we see them carrying out the law beyond what they are constitutionally authorized to carry out. A good example is Zamfara State. The reason why Zamfara has become as it were, the hotspot and the origin for banditry and the crisis that the Northwest has become today is because of this exactly. Zamfara had a challenge of cattle rustling. and some other minor crime, issues. And to address that, they created what they call the NTA, which is a vigilante arrangement. Unfortunately, because the NTA was not properly constituted to understand where its power starts and ends, the NTA now started targeting people of Fulani extraction for the simple reason that it was the Fulanis that were behind the cattle rustling and the criminality, when in reality the Fulanis were victims, because who owns the cattle?
They do.
Exactly. So what happened is that the NSAK started targeting persons of Fulani ethnicity. When they come to the market, even their women, they would arrest them, kill them, rape them sometimes. And the third part of this, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, the Fulanis will report this to the police, and unfortunately, a lot of them became victims of extortion. So their wives have been raped, killed. They've reported to the police, and so the police to step in and look into the matter. The police now start extorting them, sometimes would arrest them. So the unfortunate part of this is that the Fulanis now retreated and went into the bush. Somehow, somewhere, they got weapons.
That's the retaliation now.
Exactly. They got weapons, first off to protect themselves, and then criminality now came into it. So you see how a mismanaged vigilante arrangement would create the kind of challenges that we have in Nigeria. So the vigilantes are very good. They are very supportive platforms within the national security architecture, but they need to be managed properly.
Yes.
They need to be trained by the police. The constitution, the mandate that set them up needs to be very clear. That's why, to an extent, I like what Amotekun has been done to the Amotekun arrangement. If some of the lapses that I have seen and have pointed out are corrected, one of the lapses is this: it was created with the perception that, just like I mentioned in Zamfara, majority of the crimes are being done by Fulanis, when in reality that's not likely to be the case. They are criminals of different ethnic extraction. So if that is corrected and Amotekun goes out to do its job without that ethnic affiliation, then we're likely to see a reduction of crime in those locations, because you have now a support structure at the grassroots level that is able to feed into the entire national security architecture. If, however, unfortunately, there is no training, no delineation of the functions of the vigilante group, then we would have a situation where, unfortunately, they would use powers that they don't have, and before you know it, we see retaliation from the other side.
We're gradually winding down, Mr. Femi.
But as we went down, let's look, you just talked about training, but I am more concerned about the training of the formal military agencies, like the prison officials we just saw now. How adequate is their training? Because I know they have command and staff colleges, they have various training institutions, but are they knowledgeable enough for the emerging trend in security in Nigeria now?
I would urge you, your studio has the reach and the capability to go to their training centers and do an expose for Nigerians to see. A lot of us will be shocked. And that is one major challenge within the national security architecture. Training has been most times left almost untended over a period. There is no, I think very few of them. The SSS stands out, perhaps maybe the NIA and the military departments, they stand out in that regard. They've been able to invest in their training institutions, and so you have what is near good in terms of, but the police, there was a rival channel, I think, that did an expose on a police training institution somewhere in Lagos, and we all saw what was revealed. So training is a huge issue, and the correctional services is not excluded in that regard. Over time, that aspect of their operations has been neglected, unfortunately, and the obvious visibility of that is the product that it is churning out. So we need to correct that. I know our discussion did not focus on the recruitment process itself, because I mean
it's also critical.
It's part of it.
Absolutely,
it's critical because if you don't have enough manpower,
or
apart from
the process
the quality,
by which,
the recruitment, exactly. If you recruit, staff personnel that are not trainable, and I say this with all sense of responsibility. Sometimes I offer trainings, and there are people that are not trainable, frankly. For one reason or the other, they were not cut out to be security personnel, or when they applied for the job, they didn't realize what the job entails, and through the selection process, nobody discovered that, and all of a sudden they found themselves as security personnel, and they are now practicing security personnel, and they are, frankly, it's better that you don't even have them there than they're there, because they're not, firstly, they're not interested, and then, like I said, they're not trainable.
Okay, so this may be the last question, so very briefly now, there are 240 prisons or more, correct me if I'm wrong, which has the capacity each to accommodate 50,000 people. But we've got to see, you know, a lot of prisons in Nigeria, the correctional centers, so to say, overcrowded. As a way forward, if we must end this prison break in Nigeria and also put a check to some of the security threats, what will be your recommendations?
Ruth, in simple terms, I will mention 3 words. I know it may sound funny, but justice, equity, and fairness. If we can do this, then some of the pressures that we're feeling right now would immediately reduce. And I'll quickly explain.
Justice, equity, and fairness in the larger Nigerian society, or in the military, in the security agencies?
And larger, that buttress or channels into the security agencies, especially the correctional services. Now, for the sake of time, the correctional services is the last part of the administration of criminal justice system. Yes. The first 2 parts are law enforcement and then the judicial system. Yes. So it means the correctional services is dependent on these first 2. Yes. So where you have a situation where the first 2 are deficient, then you can imagine the products that are within the correctional services, the number of people that are either been unfairly sent to that correctional service, the number of persons that are awaiting trial for offenses that probably, if they had been sentenced, they would probably just have 2 years, and they've been there for maybe God knows how long. So that is the first thing that needs to be corrected, and that's why I said equity, fairness, and justice. If we're able to do that and ensure the administration of criminal justice system is improved upon, then some of the challenges within the correctional services will reduce automatically.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kabir Adamu. I know you want to go on. This is your expertise. Yeah. Thank you very much for
Thank you very much for having me
with us. And our panelists, Mr. Femi Okewo, our judiciary correspondent here in NTA. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
All right. We have been looking at security challenges and prison breaks in Nigeria. And from what Mr. Kabiru said, justice, equity, and fairness, it should be put a check. I'm Ruth Aguele, and that's Platform. Enjoy your day.